Job search is a lifelong skill that you just need to continue to revisit. I still love process to this day. I still deal with process engineering as a part of working in education. Social connectedness kind of goes hand in hand with empathy for people.
Welcome to EGR Pod, where engineers tell their stories. Today, I'm talking with Cody Mann from Minnesota State University. He's the Director of Operations for the Iron Range Engineering Bell program. He holds a Bachelor's of Engineering in Chemical Engineering and a Master's of Engineering also in Chemical Engineering. Thanks for joining us today, Cody.
Thanks for having me, Nina.
I'd like to start by hearing about what led you to engineering. Out of all the majors out there, what made you choose engineering?
So that's an interesting question. Out of high school, I had it narrowed down to two main avenues. I wanted to either be a chiropractor or an engineer. And I was exploring those two possibilities and really thought the chiropractor work was very interesting. And I went in for one of my regularly scheduled appointments as a high school athlete, going to the chiropractor often. And I talked to the chiropractor and I asked him about his experiences. I said, "Hey, doc, what do you think about engineering or being a chiropractor? Because that's kind of what I want to do." And he said, if I had to do it all over again, I would be an engineer. And here's why. And he went on to explain how his brother's an engineer and his schedule is flexible. And he feels like he's really solving the world's problems versus people's back pains. And he said he still gets reward out of the job he has. But that really actually was the reason why I started pursuing engineering, was because of my chiropractor who helped me to make that decision.
So when you started your engineering education as an undergraduate, did you feel like he had given you good advice?
I think so. I always knew that math and science, just the STEM field in general, was of interest to me, and I wanted to pursue something in that STEM field. For a chiropractor, I still needed to go on after my undergrad. And so I figured engineering was a great place to start anyway. And so it really wasn't too much of a shift for me with my mindset and my direction until after that first 3 or 4 years. But it was the right direction. I really enjoy math and science and the application side of engineering.
Can you tell us a little bit about the transition from high school to college for you personally? What was that like?
Yeah, I attended a community college. And for anybody listening to the podcast who's either at a community college or is considering going to a community college, it was a really good decision for me. I could have relocated and went somewhere else to a university. For me, it was a money saver. I was able to stay at home, live with my parents another 2 years, help around the house. I felt like at that age, of course, I was adding a little bit more value to my parents at the house. I wasn't just getting fed every night. The community college feel was incredible. All my instructors knew me by my first name, whether I was walking down the hallway or I was in class. Smaller class sizes, that really spoke to me. So having started at a community college that focused a lot on project-based learning, I was very happy with my decision to start there.
Do you have any recollection of a specific memory, academic or otherwise, that was defining from those community college years?
Yes, I actually really enjoy social connectedness. That's one of my top values in life, is just being connected with people. And I had some friends that I had made at the community college. We had formed a study group and we used to go to my parents' house. So of course, community college, didn't have my own house, but we'd go to my parents' house, go into the basement, and we'd throw a big whiteboard on the floor and we'd all lay down and start writing on our own parts of the whiteboard and just going through calculus problems time and time again. And that's something that I'll remember for the rest of my life, because actually I was going through this program with my then girlfriend, later on fiance, and now my wife. And so I always say, if you can get through calculus together with your significant other, that you can make it through the rest of your marriage. But yeah, we had a really good study group going on. We'd always reward ourselves with a game of pool. One of my neighbors gifted my parents with a pool table when they had passed away. And to this day, we still try to go over to my parents' house and shoot around a pool around the holidays.
You have a good balance there. It's not all just work and struggle. It's actually fun. Glad to hear that was your experience. So that was community college. And then you transferred to Minnesota State.
Yep.
And was that seamless? What was that transition like?
For me, it was because Iron Range Engineering through Minnesota State University, Mankato is based in Virginia, Minnesota. So it's this satellite program that is 4.5 hours away from the main university campus. So it wasn't this culture shock of going to a big university with so many more people. I was still on a community college campus, and I was still able to have that social connectedness with my peers, with my instructors. And so that transition for me was very seamless. I was able to apply a lot of what I was learning in my first couple of years to the application side of engineering, because we really focused on the industry projects as a part of my junior and senior years at Iron Range Engineering. So it was project-based learning, but very much working alongside engineers in industry from my region to kind of see what engineers do where I live, rather than just learn about what they do through word of mouth or learning about it in a book.
So actually just getting out there and connecting with the real world.
Yep.
I guess that's a unique experience because you had that community college that was so intertwined with your bachelor's degree, and you were a chemical engineer, correct?
Yes.
But you were receiving a bachelor's in engineering with a specialization in chemical. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So the program that I actually work for now as the director of operations, we have a Bachelor of Science in Engineering degree that is awarded through our integrated engineering department, meaning that we really focus on trying to deliver a program, a model that serves the holistic engineer. As a graduate, I really understood the mechanical realm, electrical realm, and systems engineering, how those tie together, as well as business. So the business side, the entrepreneur side of being an engineer. That was the premise of the degree. That was the foundation of the degree. And then beyond that, I focused in chemical engineering, meaning that I took 16 total classes that pertain specifically to chemical engineering through my own choosing. So I was able to go through and tailor my education in my last 2 years towards what I wanted to use it for. And it was really on the process engineering side. Instrumentation was also a big one. I worked for United States Geological Survey as an intern, and I worked very closely with instrumentation and data collection and analysis, and then was able to use some of those transferable skills when I transitioned into being an employee at Blandon Paper Company, so a paper making company in northern Minnesota, where I then also was working on not only chemical engineering projects, but was placed on quite a few teams where we worked on mechanical, electrical, and other types of engineering problems. And I feel like that learning that I did at Iron Range Engineering prepared me for being more of that holistic engineer that could solve a lot of those open-ended cross-disciplinary problems. So it wasn't just in that chemical realm. But I still love process to this day. I still deal with process engineering as a part of working in education. And I think that's what continues to motivate me to stay in education.
Some of our listeners may not be entirely familiar with what process engineering is. Can you give us a short summary of what you did?
Absolutely. The big scale, or like the 10,000 foot view of this, is process is exactly what you think it is. It is creating a recipe for making dinner at night. There's a process there. A bedtime routine, a morning routine, all of that is process. When you reconcile your purchase cards within your company, there's a process that someone has created. And so when I was working in industry as an engineer, a lot of the process projects that I was placed on was taking a 10,000 foot view look at the process of paper making. So we had the start of our paper making line to the very end where we're shipping it out the door. And what I did as a part of being a process engineer is looked at every specific part of that process, whether it was the rewind or it was the coding machine or whatever part along that assembly line or the process making line that I could go in and try to optimize something that we were using, whether it was part of the equipment that was being used or it was the manual labor that was going into a paper break, what we could do to help minimize downtime when we had a paper break in the coder. All sorts of different projects that would involve process engineering. But it is as broad as I try to make it sound. Process engineering quite literally is everywhere, and it's a part of everybody's daily lives.
How many years did you spend out of school working?
Yeah, out of school working. It was about a year before I came back to education. And I always thought that I'd be out in industry for 20, 25 years, like many of my colleagues that I work with now in education, mainly because I wanted to gain that perspective of what it's like to work in industry, take some of the information that I learned also through the coworkers in industry, and then apply it back in the education setting. And what I found is that when I came back, I had this itch to get back out right away. But then I quickly realized that the design projects that we had students working on have project coaches. And so I was coaching a team on solving these open-ended problems for industry clients, much like I did when I was a student, gaining these practical experiences. And I think what it did is it helped broaden my scope, and I was able to better understand the types of engineering that exist out there, not only in my region, but also as I was coaching students on their own internships and co-ops, because now we are a work-based program. We've transitioned from just the design model of working with clients from industry, and now students are going out working full-time in industry. So I'm really living those experiences and understanding them and helping to solve some of those open-ended problems alongside students. And that's also helped me fulfill that part of my dream of being an engineer, and taking those experiences and applying that learning back to the education side. So it's come full circle, and I haven't really had that itch to get back into industry because of that.
Had you always been thinking about education in the background as you were an undergraduate, or was that something that just came to you as you were working in industry and saw some connections?
That's also a great question. My parents, along with some others, always thought that I'd be a good teacher. Like, hey, you should be a math teacher in the high schools. And I always laughed at them because I felt like K-12 might not be the pathway for me. But as I got towards the end of my undergraduate, I started to realize that the instruction at the college level does intrigue me. And so I immediately started my master's program in a technical engineering field. I needed to get it in a technical field so I could help to give back at that community college level for engineering courses. And so that's why I pursued my Master of Engineering in chemical engineering through University of Minnesota Duluth, so that I could eventually go back and be an instructor or an adjunct at a community college. So it was in the back of my mind as I was graduating with my bachelor's degree.
You've shared a lot of your projects that you've worked on, experiences, memories from community college, and that idea of loving having that group of people, including your now wife, and working on math and enjoying what you were doing. Are there any standout memories or aha moments that really inspired you?
I think it was attending the graduations, not only my own graduation as a student, but we were invited to the dinner to celebrate the graduates each semester. And I remember attending those graduation ceremonies, thinking to myself that one day I'll be in their seat and walking across the stage and celebrating my own graduation. But there's just so much reward that came with that. It was this sense of achievement from the student side. It was the camaraderie with the families there and celebrating their students, their children, their grandchildren, their cousins, whatever it may be, and watching them walk across the stage. Then listening to the instructors talk about how it was so rewarding to work with somebody and help them to develop into the engineer they wanted to be. I always heard stories around that time of the year as well, like where the instructors would say, well, I haven't heard from so-and-so for 3, 4, 5 years, but I just got a phone call from them the other day saying how they really wish they had reached out more and how much gratitude they had to express that has gotten them to that point in their life. And that was really what spoke to me and why I wanted to get back into education earlier. The opportunity presented itself because the program was changing at the time from that project-based model to the work-based model. So I was helping on the forefront of that. But it was really the reward side that intrigued me the most, that I felt like that would be a really good pathway for me early on if it worked out.
We often in our intro classes talk about many aspects of engineering, but one of them being that we want to do something that contributes to the world in general. And we often think about the types of problems that engineers solve. But education doesn't necessarily come to people's minds initially, but this is a nice example where giving back to people in terms of them learning is also the type of contribution. Other than the obvious engineering work that you're doing with industry in combination with the students that you work with, are there ways in which your engineering education benefited you in your current job?
Yes. And like you stated, the obvious is the technical side. So becoming technically competent in teaching and in being an instructor in helping people become professionals in this industry. That's a big part of it. Actually, as I got closer to graduation, I started doing things in a way that empathizes with students, because empathy is another one of my top values in life. Is social connectedness kind of goes hand in hand with that level of empathy for people, and trying to live as many life situations or life events, live through those so that I can help others live through their own situations and deal with their own obstacles and challenges in life. For example, I passed my FE exam before I graduated, became an engineer in training shortly after I graduated with the degree, and also passing the FE exam. And that gave me that confidence that I know that I have the technical capabilities to teach this content because I have mastered it in some capacity. And then my master's degree was one of those experiences where I was working full time and also going to school in the evenings and trying to balance those two things. I had a family during the graduate studies. So I ended up having a couple of children from my start date of graduate studies to the end date of my graduate studies. And so having lived those experiences, I truly feel like I am able to empathize with a lot of our students who are transitioning into the workplace, that are transitioning into raising a family, or people who have raised a family for a couple of years who are trying to get an education so that they can work in industry. I feel like I've really prepared myself well for helping to empathize with people. And it just continues to grow. Like I continue to see opportunities and seek opportunities to give back and volunteer in my own local communities and try to be involved. I'm pursuing my doctorate. And so that's something I'm doing as a part of working, raising a family, going to school. So just trying to live those experiences so I can help other people do it too.
Were you at all thinking, I'm going to become a professional engineer and getting that PE designation for our listeners who may not be familiar with the professional engineer path? Or truly, did you know at the time, I'm doing this because I want to know what it's like, because one day I will be guiding other people through this process?
It's so interesting because at the time that I was studying for this exam at Iron Range Engineering, I was tasked with trying to document my studying habits so that we could try and replicate what it takes to pass the exam and how we can build it into our curriculum. And so it did have that aspect of it that I was doing it so that others can do it too. But I also did have that individual side of a little bit of selfishness of like, I want to make sure that I can defend myself and say I am competent in the field of engineering. And I also want to eventually sit for my PE. And that was the other nice thing is I felt like at the time, nothing was clear cut, especially because I had this mindset. I was going to be in industry for 20 years before this opportunity came up to come back to education. And with that, I was definitely planning to take my PE a lot earlier on. I still do plan to take my PE at some point in my career after I finish my doctorate. I guess going back to that first part of it and helping to build a curriculum, we do have a curriculum now where our students are practicing questions that we help to create as a group of faculty and staff who have taken the FE exam, have passed, and helped to prepare our own students for passing that same exam. We've had a pretty good success rate in students passing that exam after we implemented this new curriculum.
You seem to have a very positive attitude about flexibility and being open to change and doing different things and following the things that are important to you. Were there any challenges that you'd be willing to share with us?
Yeah, I have a couple of challenges to share. And, to your point about staying positive, I do have a growth mindset. I keep an open mind. I was trained in that way with some of the mentors I had along the way in my engineering career through education and in industry. And that really helps. So I think a message for all the listeners is try to find a good mentor. And I had to seek my mentors. I wasn't just like handed one or assigned a mentor, but I really did seek my mentors. And that has helped me along the way, especially through some of the challenges that I've faced. So one of the early challenges, one of the reasons why I actually ended up taking the educational pathway a lot earlier than I intended was I was at the paper mill and they had two operational lines for their papermaking process. They had the 5-line and 6-line operating. They had decommissioned the first 4 lines for the papermaking process earlier in the 2000s. And unfortunately, it was a little bit of a dying industry for its particular niche. And that was the magazine paper that we were making at our plant. but they have adapted well. I still talk to quite a few people who work within the plant, and I do feel like they have a positive future at the paper mill. But they had to decommission their 5 line, and that led to 100 people being laid off. And I was fresh. I was new. I was just out of college, and I had been offered a couple of different positions within the company to stay on as a shift coordinator, a supervisory role. I also was offered to go overseas and work overseas as a part of their main headquarters in Finland. But I ultimately decided with that challenge that it was time for me to consider something else. And it wasn't education right away. And so that's when I went to my mentors and I asked questions. I wanted to know what was the best pathway forward. I ended up applying for a couple different positions. I received a few different job offers, but in parallel to applying for these jobs, I was actually able to get a hold of Ron Alseth at Iron Range Engineering, and it was just perfect timing. The stars aligned for me to help him out with this idea that in parallel, I'd be finding another job in engineering industry. And so I was kind of getting paid as, you could call it an adjunct staff member, where I was going around and really answering the question of if we built this co-op working model for students around the country at these various community colleges that would potentially transfer into this program, would they come? Would they find value in a program like this? And so I helped to answer that question. So that was one of the challenges I had to overcome, was the job search. And that's a part of it too, is that we try to teach our students, and really anybody who's listening to the podcast, job search is a lifelong skill that you just need to continue to revisit. It's kind of like riding a bike, where if you haven't ridden a bike in a while and you go out, you get sore after the first ride because it's been a little while. But job search is no different. I think it's something that we are going to revisit at various points of our lives. I guess that was one of the bigger challenges that I faced early on in my career. And then in my graduate studies, one other challenge I'll just quickly cover is I got to my last class in my graduate studies, and I had a new child that we had just brought home from the hospital, and my oldest was having sleep regressions, and it was, night classes, one of the toughest night classes that I had taken. It was related to water policy, and there was a lot going on, a lot of different assignments. It was a very challenging course for me, but it also was at the time of the pandemic. I remember like every night I would put the kids to bed at around 8 o'clock, go back upstairs, start on my project I was working on with another classmate. And then anytime between like 9 and 11, my daughter would wake up screaming, and I have to go back downstairs to lay on her floor until she fell back asleep, and then go back up, which sometimes I'd fall asleep too, being that I'd lay there for a couple hours. And so time management was a challenge in my last semester of my graduate studies for various reasons. But I think it was, again, a situation where I leaned on my wife. I was able to flex a couple of things out of my schedule that she was able to take on. I talked to some mentors of mine, helped to delegate some of the other activities, extracurricular activities. I volunteer in my community often, like I was saying, and I had to jump off of a volunteer committee for the season and jump back on the year after. But those are challenges that I think we all face, that we sometimes need to recognize that our plate is too full and we have to cut back a little bit. And it's not to say that we'll never get back to doing whatever it is we're dropping at that time, but it is a challenge that I think we're all faced with at one point.
That's great advice. I think a lot of people feel overwhelmed at times, and sometimes it feels like there's no way out of that. And there is. We just have to stick with it and figure out some creative solutions. So I have just 2 questions left. One of them is kind of hard because we take a path and we can't really compare what other paths would have looked like since we didn't take them. But is there anything you think you would have done differently along this journey?
Yes. I think I would have considered, had I not had a girlfriend at the time, and a very serious girlfriend that ended up being my wife today, I was considering the Air Force. And to this day, I still feel like there's a part of me that would like to serve my country in some capacity. And so now that I have a family and all these other things going on in my life, I do feel like the time has ran out, so to speak. But I look back on that and feel like there are certain things that led me away from doing that at the time. But it is something that I strongly consider now that I don't think I really strongly considered then. It was like chiropractor and engineer. That's kind of what I wanted to do at the time. But then as I moved through my undergrad, that's a thought that popped up. Maybe a strange thing to reflect on and think back to when I didn't really have that urge before, but definitely something I consider.
That's, I think, true of so many people. There are many things we think we might like to do or don't even know it at the time, but life takes its course. We're happy with what we have, but there are those things that linger. So that's
Yes.
interesting to hear. You've given a ton of great advice. Would you like to leave our listeners with any last tips or any last thoughts?
Yes. I am focusing my dissertation and my doctoral research on living life with others. The main idea behind it is that we as people are not meant to live in isolation. We're not meant to figure it all out on our own. And there are many ways that we can be supported through mentorship, whether it's peer-to-peer mentorship or coaches or mentors in different realms of your life will help to set you up for success. So you should have somebody that you lean on or count on, or multiple people you count on from your peer group, from your friend group. Then shifting into your life, maybe there's a friend's parents or a grandparent or whatever it may be that really helped you make decisions or continues to help make decisions in your life. And then also in your career, whether it's engineering or something else, try to find some people within the career field itself so that you can lean on those people in those challenges that you face in your lifetime. But above all else, do life together. Life is too short to live in isolation. And at a time where mental health is really at the forefront of a lot of things that we're doing for once, I think it's important that we focus on those things.
That is fantastic advice. Thank you so much, Cody, for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Nina. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you to our listeners. This podcast is produced by Nina Lord and supported by Northern Virginia Community College. For information about engineering at Nova, please visit us at nvcc.edu or on Instagram at EGR_AT_NOVA.